First, a few words about my approach. The approach that I take is kind of my default approach to just about anything, is through the lens of Torah and Jewish thinking and Jewish tradition, precisely what the anti-Semite would obliterate from this world. My overall question here is to try to get at an understanding of what is the anti-Semite anyway. And it has a couple of very fundamental things in Jewish tradition and teaching and Torah kind of have alerted me to try to look at this in a certain way. First of all, the first temptation, the original temptation, is that you will be like God. I think much of anti-Semitism is about being like God, usurping the throne of judgment of God. Of course, you can't be like God unless you get rid of God, yet unless you kill God. The anti-Semites are the real deicides, actually. And the way you kill God is to kill God's witnesses. In one of the ancient texts, it's a commentary on Deuteronomy called the Sifrei. It's written, God says, when you are my witnesses, I am God. When you're not my witnesses, I'm not God. I need you to be my witnesses. And a second important point here concerns how do we understand the dearness of the other human being? What is the basis of that preciousness in the other human being, if there is any? It shapes everything else in our vision of the world, this question. And of course, in the Jewish tradition, which has been, goes into other traditions as well, it's not only Jewish, every human being every soul emanates from a creator. Therefore, spiritually, metaphysically, each soul is connected to the other through a connection to the origin, to the source. Spiritually, we also have a fundamental physical connection in addition to the metaphysical through Adam. In a text called the Tosefta, rabbinic discussions from 2,000 years ago, the rabbis ask, why does God start with one and not with two? And of course, they always have dozens of replies to the question, but the one I like is so that no one can say to another, my side of the family is better than your side of the family. There's only one side of the family. As we say in Texas, we all blood. We're all fundamentally, each of us, connected to the other. Each of us in Hebrew is a Ben Adam, a child of Adam. Each of us is a child of the Holy One. We address God as Avinu, our Father. Right? So this teaching is about a fundamental connection that each of us has to the other. Anti-Semitism, in many ways, is about generating a fundamental disconnection. So, who are these anti-Semites? Anyway, these are a few of the infamous Jew haters. Most of them are probably recognizable to you, perhaps not the upper left-hand corner. That's Antiochus Epiphanes from the Maccabean period. And to the right of him is John Chrysostom and others. What do these guys have in common with each other? What does Farrakhan have in common with Martin Luther? What does Hajj Amin al-Husseini have in common with Richard Wagner? They hate Jews. What do they hate? And exactly what are they hating when you say they hate Jews? What are you hating? Well, here are some Jews. These are Jews. These are Jews. Who could hate that baby? These are Jews. What is it that meets the eye that becomes the object of hatred? This is what they hate. the eternal Jew, the Jew as an abstraction, the Jew as a metaphysical category. Eternal already places the Jew in this category of metaphysics, which is the way I approach things often. This is an image of the invisible evil, an evil that's eternal, infernal, and ubiquitous, but invisible. This what Hitler called the invisible wire pullers. It's the evil that preys on the soul, the evil that will suck forth your lifeblood, that will corrupt your women, that will murder your children. The premise here is not that all Jews are evil, but all evil is Jewish. The way you bring redemption to the world is through the eradication of evil, that is to say, the extermination of the Jews. This will redeem humanity. Just look at the discourse. Look at what they say. The Jews threaten not just the body politic, but the life of the soul. The Jews threaten your entry into heaven or the establishment of the ideological utopia on earth. Okay? So you can see this is the anti-Semitism, at least in my view, is not reducible to racism or xenophobia or scapegoating. These things are often in the mix, in the manifestation. You know, as my daughter, the doctor, I have to work that into every conversation. As my daughter, the doctor, tells me, she talks about how a disease presents. But how it presents is not what you're trying to cure. Right? So, in the remarks to come, watch for these three things, three pillars, three key elements, as I see it, in the unfolding of anti-Semitism over the centuries and into our own time. Word, blood, and redemption. The word, the holy word, the hagiographic word, the word of God, has to be appropriated in the usurpation of God. If you're going to become like God, you have to speak for God. Okay? You have to have a word, a holy word that supersedes the holy tongue, the Hebrew Bible. It's a word that determines how we understand truth and as well as history. A few months ago, Mahmoud Abbas, for example, repeated what's said in Article 20 of the PLO Charter, namely that the Jews have never had a place historically in Israel. They've never been there. Which makes them colonizers and not just people who return. Right? Charter of Allah, Article 22, states that the Jews have been the key player that played the major role in every war and every revolution.
What's the Charter of Allah?
Oh, the Hamas Charter of Allah is where they lay out in article by article what they believe, what they represent, and what they seek to attain. Okay. Interestingly, they cite three proof texts. Quran, texts from the Hadith, the sort of the oral tradition put into writing in Islam, and Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Protocols is like a holy text. Blood manifests in this dynamic in lots of ways, not just in the blood libel, but blood is key because the soul is in the blood, as we're taught. The life is in the blood. If the vampire is going to take your soul, he drinks your blood. Drinking blood is a fundamental appropriation of the one whose blood you drink. In the Eucharist, drinking the blood is a way of bonding with, becoming one with the Christ. In Jewish tradition, we see where consuming blood is forbidden. We sometimes interpret Amalek as amlak, a people who drinks blood. And indeed, on the 28th of November 1971, when Black September assassinated Wasfi al-Tal, the Jordanian minister in Cairo, one of the assassins went over and licked his blood off the pavement. Contagion is carried in the blood. The blood becomes key in issues of purity. Whether it's blood that carries disease like the Black Death or COVID, it threatens the purity of the body, of believers, the body politics, both physically and spiritually. Finally, redemption. The ways in which Jews threaten redemption shows itself sometimes obviously. They're the killers of the Redeemer, right? The Christ killers. They desecrate the host, the body of Christ. They reenact this murder of Jesus. In Islam, you have in the Al-Bukhari hadith, I just mentioned hadith, a teaching that says that the ultimate redemption at the end of days will not come until the Jews are purged. And in the final battle, the rocks and the trees will cry out, "Oh, Abdullah, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come kill him." So that you see nature itself vomiting up the Jews. So the eternal Jew and his Torah stand in the way of a humanity seeking a place in eternity. Now, the contempt for the Jews goes back, you could say, to Pharaoh and Moses. Some say, well, anti-Semitism didn't really kick in until with the advent of Christianity, but you do have precursors in that world. Democritus claimed that the Jews would go out on the highways, kidnap strangers, and take them and offer them in blood sacrifice in their temple. Manetho, Egyptian priest, claimed that the Jews are the carriers of disease, leprosy, contagion. Tacitus, the Roman historian, complained that the Jews are so backward they refuse to engage in human sacrifice. But there's a fundamental shift, indeed, from this cultural view of the Jews as weird. They're funny, they're strange. They're atheists. When Titus went into the temple and found no statues, he concluded that the Jews must be atheists. There are no gods in here. With the advent of Christianity, this is where you see this movement of the Jew into a theological category and not a cultural curiosity. Big difference. And early on, look at the dates. Ignatius of Antioch, he died in 108. I mean, the Jews and the Christians are still trying to work out whether the Christians are a Jewish sect or not at this early time. But already, Ignatius is telling the Christian community, get rid of that Torah. Don't follow it. Don't heed that word. Don't do the mitzvot, the commandments. The mitzvot, etymologically, a mitzvah is a root sapta, which means connection. Don't connect to God like that. Jesus is your connection. In the subsequent centuries, you see St. Irenaeus, this is the beginning of supersessionism. When the new comes, the old is done away with. Superseded, illegitimate. Note the book. Most of the images of the church fathers have portrayed the father holding a book. The word, a new covenant, a new dispensation. As this continues to unfold, these are all saints, of course. Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Origen, Cyprian. Tertullian wrote a work called Adveros Judaeos, the contempt for the Jews, where the teaching of contempt makes contempt for the Jews into a religious duty, something holy and pleasing to God. It's like a prayer. It's like praying. It's like one of the pillars. And Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, says jihad is the sixth pillar of Islam. This contempt for the Jews becomes a pillar of Christianity. And the Jews, of course, soon take on the designation of Christ killers, or those guilty of deicide, which removes them from a human category. A human can't kill God. In other words, it opens up the way to a demonization of the Jew. John Chrysostom, note the dates. He died in 407, soon after Christianity, a generation after Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Okay, this is always a problem. When a particular religion is not just part of a culture, but is the official religion of the state. They worship the devil. Now, this demonization is tied to an understanding that the Jews reject and kill Jesus, not because they don't know he's the Messiah, but because they precisely know he's the Messiah. They know better than anybody else how to recognize the Messiah. They wrote the book. It's not like these, the Hindus, Buddhists, Far Eastern peoples who don't know from Jesus or Messiah, don't know anything. You can convert them. You can't convert the Jews if they're devils. Nevertheless, in principle, the path to conversion remained open. St. Jerome, this is kind of the a major appropriation of the word. You translate it. The Vulgate. Has anyone here wondered, well, why didn't they read the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew? Because it doesn't say quite what you want it to say. Right. Augustine and Jerome had corresponded about this translation project. I'm sure just about everyone here knows more than one language, and when you go from one into another, you do translating is interpreting. Right? Another move with regard to the word and used to delegitimize the Jews is the word of the law. Okay, how we understand law is directly tied to how we understand status of human being, the meaning of a human being, the value of a human being. Law determines value. The first thing the Nazis did, April 7th, 1933, was to launch a vast program of legislation against the Jews. Everything done to the Jews under Nazi authority was legal. January 20th, 1942, when Reinhard Heydrich convened what's known as the Wannsee Conference, if you read the protocols online, the notes taken by Eichmann, he says a couple of times, everything must be done in a legal manner. We must exterminate a people lawfully. You understand? And the code, so this is, it's not a code of extermination, but you understand that law determines status, political status, social status. Now, with the advent of Islam, you have a similar pattern. The introduction of a new word, a supersessionist word, basically. In the Quran, it states that the Jews falsified the scriptures. This is the book. This is the book. And you can find in the Quran, statements vilifying, demonizing, dehumanizing the Jews. The Jews are, soon become a source of corruption or contagion, certainly when they reject Islam. And early on, In the lifetime of Muhammad himself, Jews were killed or expelled from the Arabian Peninsula. The Banu Qurayza, Banu Nadir, Banu Kanuka are famous cases. And you see, this is an old image of that expulsion and murder, purging the community of the Jew. This is followed by laws, codes of law, pacts. The word of the law, the Pact of Umar, second Caliph of Rashidun. This is early on. A more famous pact is the Pact of Umar II in 717, which outlined dhimmi status. Dhimmi means protected. And there's certain peoples designated as people of the book who, if they pay a tax, they enjoy the protection of the state. But again, the law, notice that the law determines standing of human. And on the basis of what? Here it's believer, non-believer. If you're a believer, you're more human than if you're a non-believer, so to say. The non-believers, again, are a source of corruption, and once in a while you see the non-believers purged from the body of believers. The massacre of the Jews of Granada in 1066 is a famous case. This is at the hands of the Muslims. Notice also here, when you have not just the new word, but the new creed, the Jews have trouble. Judaism is not a creed-based religion. I mean, we didn't write down what we believe, I say, until Maimonides, who died in 1204, who was trying to explain, well, what do we believe anyway? Crucial to redemption in Christianity and Islam and other traditions is correct belief, the creed, the recitation of a creed, the affirmation that I believe, I believe, I believe. The non-believer has a problem, put it that way. In Judaism, the more crucial question is not what do you believe, but how do you behave? How do you treat your neighbor? That's much more crucial than what you believe. So in Judaism, we have this notion of the righteous among the nations. You don't have to follow Judaism to have a place with God. You just have to treat each other with loving kindness. Okay? So when Ibn Tumart of Morocco decides he's going to purify Islam, this is a matter of correct belief. And even within Islam, within Christianity, within the traditions, you have this purification movement. It's not just against the Jews, it can be from within, right? Ibn Tumart is known to have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, the Jews, that is, that the name of Israel no longer, maybe no more in remembrance. To the war against the Jews is a war against memory. The Primo Levi and Elie Wiesel, independently of each other, described the Holocaust as a war against memory. Memory of your own name. What do you remember when you know your name? We're told in our tradition, we have a teaching that says when you die and lie in the grave, the angel of death will come to you to take you into God's presence. But you have to be able to answer a question. And the question is, what is your name? To know your name is to know your tradition, the name of your mother and your father, how to answer when you're called by name to the task for which you're created. And Ibn Tumart is targeting not just the people of Israel, but the name and the remembrance. Okay? And this is in anticipation of the Almohad persecutions, which were again, these are efforts to purify Islam. If you note the dates, you'll see that these are taking place during the Crusades. Also a purification move, you might say, on the part of the Christians to purge the contagion from the Holy Land, right, of the infidels from the Christian point of view. During this period, you have the Fourth Lateran Council, where there were only a few measures against the Jews, but they were significant, including like wearing a marker on your clothing, for instance. And it's at this time that the Pope, Innocent III, declared that the blood of Jesus is crying out, is calling out for retribution, perhaps. And how do you atone for or recompense the spilling of the blood of Jesus, spilling the blood of the Jews? It takes the blood of the Jews to atone for the blood of that Jew. This is also the time of the advent of Inquisitions. The medieval Inquisition, followed later by Spanish, Portuguese, and Roman Inquisitions. And the Inquisitions are about heresy, rooting out heresy, because the key to redemption is correct belief as prescribed by the Word, by the Creed. And the Nicene Creed of the year 325 was hammered out in a climate of Christians themselves don't know what they believe, or they argued about what they believe. What do you believe about Jesus? And part of what was happening at the Council of Nicaea was to identify heresies. Judaism, of course, is at best a heresy. Judaizing was certainly the heresy addressed by Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions. So it's with the advent of Inquisitions, the renewal of establishing correct belief in the 13th century, you have the first, major burning of holy books and the Talmud in Paris in 1242. The Talmud especially was targeted. And this came at the instigation of Nicholas Donin, who was a Jew and converted to Catholicism at the time. And he got the ear of the Pope, Gregory IX. He said, hey, you know what's in that Talmud? You better take care of it. Now, my own theory is, with regard to the Talmud, among other reasons, is that the Talmud encourages questioning. Rabban Gamliel used to begin his classes, first century sage, by saying to his students, ask. And when they would adjourn, he'd say, go and ask further. God is in the question, not in the answer. God is the El, God, in She'elah, in the midst of the question. In a creed-based tradition, you can't allow a lot of room for questioning, for what we call machloket, right? Dispute. I think that's part of what's going on in burning the Talmud. Of course, there's a connection between word and soul. When God breathes a living soul to create Adam, it says, the Targum of Onkelos, the translation is God breathes a soul, the word into Adam. As it goes with the word, so it goes with the human. Word of scripture, word of law, word of books. It's the famous quote by Heine. When you start by burning books, you end by burning people. We're looking at the same period where, with the advent of, the developments, not the advent, of medieval art, demonizing the Jews. Most people, of course, could not read and write. So how do you teach? Through images. You teach through images. They are the destroyers of redemption, the destroyers of the Redeemer, and they don't look exactly human. The only one who looks human is the Jew in the middle, Jesus. In Christendom, as it's already been pointed out, you have the first blood libel in 1144, and from then on it would reappear more and more. According to Robert Alter, there were more blood libel accusations in the 19th century than in all the previous centuries combined. In any case, it exists today in certain parts of the world. But the thing to note is that the blood libel is ritualized murder. It's a reenactment of the crucifixion. This desecration of the host is tied to blood libel, because when the host being the body of Jesus, the wafers of the communion, that Jews would steal or buy from a corrupt priest, take it home and reenact the crucifixion by driving a knife or nails into it, and the wafer would bleed. A series of massacres, known as the Rindfleisch massacres, 20,000 Jews killed, came on the wave in the wake of a series of blood libels, and you see the purification by fire. These Jews being burned as books are burned. Purification by fire comes again with the Black Death, 14th century. According to my sources, there are like 350 pogroms. People argue about how many thousand Jews were killed, but in any case, the point is that the Jew is a carrier of a contagion. Now, what is the contagion? I think the contagion is Judaism, as Alfred Rosenberg says, the Nazi ideologue. The contagion, in other words, is not that the Jews will, with their disease, will kill you physically. It's with their teaching and testimony, they'll kill your soul. Just like here. This ongoing demonization of the Jew. This image of the devil, a devil, with a circle on his collar. The circle is a Jew badge. And of course, above that is a blood libel image, a crucifixion of a child, and it's tied. It's on the same woodcut. So, over the centuries, you have expulsions of the Jews to purge your community of the poison, the contagion, I would say, of Judaism. Jews were expelled from just about every country in Europe at one point or another. There's no place for the Jews. There's no place for Judaism. And historically, I think this is a logical sequence leading ultimately to extermination. Here's one of the places where you see a first step there: Spanish Inquisition, and this limpieza de sangre. This, of course, prefigure purity of blood. Purity of blood. This prefigures various forms of race theory that would come later. The Nazis are about purity of blood. They're about rendering the world Juden rein, cleansed, purified of the Jews. There's no equivalent to Zigeuner rein, purified of gypsies or communists. It's Juden rein. And part of the purity goes to the blood, and you see this purity of blood with the Spanish Inquisition. And those of you who know this history know that the conversos always remain suspect. Most of the people burned at the stake in the auto da fe were conversos, Jews, most of them. Purification by fire. if you didn't need to be purified, in other words, if you had, in your one last chance, confessed your belief in Jesus, you would enjoy the mercy of being strangled to death instead of burned to death. Things didn't get that much better with Luther. At least the discourse didn't get much better. This is from his infamous work of 1543 on the Jews and their lies. And again, you have the Jews as Christ killers, God killers, and the Jews, in a way, are God killers. At least if you go back to Abraham as a child was left to mind the store as a teenager, which was an idol shop. His father made idols. He smashed all the idols. He looked around. This is ridiculous. These aren't God. He smashed them all except one. Father came back and said, what in the heck happened here? He put the stick with the one that's still left, and he told his father. That one got mad and smashed all the others. His father said, what do you take me for? They can't do that. And Abraham said, that's right. They can't. So Abraham is, the Jews of Egypt killed the gods of the Egyptians, the sheep, the lambs, the blood of the lamb. Anyway, in a way, the Jews are known as killers of false gods, you might say. Now, what happens in this? I've talked about religious periods. What happens with the waning of religion, you might say? There is, in the modern period, one of the things that characterizes the modern period is what I call a turn inward. And maybe in some ways Luther anticipates this with the sola fide, by faith alone. It's my inner faith that assures my salvation, not the dictates of the church or the indulgences of the priests, and the going to confession. It's my inner faith. With Kant, it's my inner reason to be autonomous, to be free. According to Kant, if you read The Grounding of the Metaphysics of Morals, is to be self-legislating through reason. Self-legislating. Wagner, you have the turn to the spirit, the Geist of the folk. Launching the folk into these kind of spiritual experiences through music, through art, through passion. With Nietzsche, it's the will. Others, it would be ideology. In any case, the autonomous individual becomes the ground of truth, meaning, morality, and so on, and not the relation to a commanding deity, which is what Kant would call a heteronymous relation. And they all had contempt for the Jews, who, for this reason, who followed the commandments of a higher authority. They have a slave mentality. Also, in this period, you see the would have been a theological threat. It remains a metaphysical threat, a cosmic threat, threatening all of creation. And we've already seen images of the Jews wrapped around the world, controlling the world. Images like these. The image on the right is an Arabic language edition of this work, the New Holy Word, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is of course, you know all about this, the forgery, but and the creators of this work knew it was a lie. But it was a lie that could be used to foment Jew hatred. And it really came into wide circulation, particularly after the First World War, which was a catastrophe for everyone. Right? I think it's one of the experts can correct me. I believe it was 1919. The German translation came out. 1926, Arabic translation started being translated and distributed, and it's widely distributed, today. But it's a secret meeting of the elders of Zion. They're invisible. They're operating behind the scenes. You can't see them. And they're everywhere. You remember the image of the Jew with the mask, taking off, removing the mask. There's behind the mask. Jews wear masks. They're hidden. The evil that is the Jew lies in nothing that meets the eye. You can't see them. Mr. Katz, the guy who runs the general store, yeah, he may seem like a nice, regular guy. But watch out for Mr. Katz. It's not about Mr. Katz in any case. It's about the invisible wire puller. So I mentioned Alfred Rosenberg, Limpieza de Sangre, how this evolves, this purity of blood idea, into modern race theory. Alfred Rosenberg, of course, was an infamous Nazi ideologue, executed in 1946 as a war criminal. He explains that the notion of Rassenseele, or race soul, by saying that with this concept, blood and character, race and soul are just different designations for the same thing. It's about essence. It's not about what you see, it's about the inner essence, the inner evil. And he's also noted that the Aryan Geist is poisoned not just by Jewish blood, but by Judaism, because the ism is in the blood. This is limpieza de sangre. The ism is in the blood. Every Jew, whether with or without payas, right? Every Jew, whether religious or not, will test positive for Judaism. Therefore, every Jew has to be eliminated if you want to free humanity of the contagion. In November 1942, the Nazis entered Tromsø, Norway. Has anybody been to Tromsø? It's like 220 plus miles into the Arctic, north of the Arctic Circle, because there were 17 Jews there. That's not scapegoating. If I need a scapegoat, I don't have to go to the Arctic. Right? Of course, this is a famous image, the contagion. I don't know if you can see the little stars of David and the communist Soviet Bolshevik hammer and sickle. So, I have tried to lay out the themes, motifs, tropes of word, blood, and redemption here, and it continues, my next point, into our own time. Burning books, burning the word, just obliterating the word. The Nazis burned books in Hebrew, Bibles in Hebrew. They didn't burn the German Bibles, but Bibles in Hebrew they burned. And the supersessionist word, as I call it, shows up in lots of ways. I mean, some people sometimes forget about the Septuagint because it's pre-Christian. The translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, but this is a Hellenization of the Hebrew Bible. And there's an ancient tension between Hellenistic and Hebraic ways of understanding the world, and there are different ways that I won't go into now. I've mentioned the Vulgate, codes of law, Quran. Luther, of course, has to do his translation of the Bible. Modern biblical scholarship kind of desanctifies the word, so that the word of the scholar eclipses the word of the scripture. Nazis burning protocols, Hamas charter, I've mentioned all these. The blood libel recurs throughout the ages. These from clockwise, from upper left. This is from 16th century, Simon of Trent. Upper right is from Der Stürmer. Lower right is a reenactment, a dramatization of blood libel broadcast on Al-Manar TV. Lower left is an image from a cartoon from Arab language media. But check this out. This is a painting by Giovanni Gasparo of Simon of Trent, famous blood libel case. And note the wound in the side, like Jesus, right? This is from painted in 2020. A recognized painter. Blood libel coming from top officials. Mustafa Tlass, Syrian minister, wrote a book called The Matzah of Zion. You get blood libel from Omar Barghouti, founder of BDS. In a lecture at UC Riverside, he claimed that the Israeli soldiers go hunting for Palestinian children every night, like it's a sport or something. That's a blood libel. This business about, oh yeah, the Israelis were first on the scene in Haiti, but you know they were there to harvest organs. That's a blood libel. And of course, the Protocols libel. Barghouti said that the reason that the U.S. has a friendly attitude toward Israel is that the Jews control the American government. Do you remember the SARS epidemic? Some of you are too young. This is before you guys were born. 25, 30 years, I don't know. Some years ago, at least 20 years ago, there was an epidemic kind of like COVID in Southeast Asia. Everything was shut down. At the time, I had an invitation to speak at 3 Chinese universities about American Jewry. I said, okay, and I asked them, what would you like for me to talk about exactly? And can you tell us exactly how the Jews control the American government? And it wasn't, I don't think it was malicious or anything. That's what they thought. Here you have other manifestations of the importance of blood. This is, you may remember, the so-called lynching of Yossi Abrahami and Vadim Noritz. Again, before your time for some of you. And notice how this is imitated. This is on the right, is a picture from a kindergarten graduation ceremony. It's not just brutality. It's holy. The spilling of blood is holy. And of course, I mentioned Amlak is people who licks blood. This famous statement from a shaheed who was a terrorist who was about to blow himself up. In his video, he says, "We drink the blood of the Jews." So that the spilling the blood of the Jews is a pathway to redemption. Now, one of the reasons that the shaheed is so honored in certain quarters of jihadist society is that he wins salvation not just for himself, but for, I think, 70 members of his family. They get a ticket to paradise also. So they'll have a shrine of him in their home, right? Or they'll name a school after him. The promise of redemption, again, I've talked about this. I won't spend a lot of time on it. The problem with the Jews, again, is not that, this is the promise that whoever believes shall not perish but have everlasting life. But if you don't believe, the wrath of God abides upon you. The wrath of God abides on the Jews not because they're murderers and rapists and organized crime lords, but they're non-believers. You have the similar creed-based tradition in Islam. So that spilling the blood of the non-believer becomes a ticket to paradise. In the time of the Crusades, there were priests who preached that anyone who kills a Jew will have his sins forgiven. You're washed in the blood of the Jew you're killing. The higher levels of the ecclesiastic hierarchy said, no, that's not how you get to, at the time, that's not how you get your sins forgiven, but it was preached in some places. Later, unlike in the time of the Crusades, when there were ecclesiastic authorities who said, no, that's not how it's done, in the time of Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, Nazi war criminal, Muslim Brotherhood guy, mentor to Yasser Arafat, other notable features about al-Husseini, we've touched on the radio broadcasts under Hitler, propaganda broadcasts in Arabic. Hajj Amin al-Husseini was the one who put that together. And he preached over and over, both in Palestine during the Arab riots, 1936-39, and with the Nazis, that whoever kills a Jew is assured a place in the next world. And I don't know of any Muslim clerics who said, no, Hajj Amin is all wrong about that. Some may have said it, but I've never heard it. But in the modern period, we have the ideologies of redemption, promising paradise on earth, including Marx, and they were all anti-Semites, but most of them were atheists, mind you. Charles Fourier, there's never been a nation more despicable than the Hebrews. Really? Why? What's so? Tossanel, I understand the persecution that the Romans, the Christians, and the Muslims made the Jews suffer, and in our contempt is a legitimate retribution. Retribution for what? Proudhon, it's not for nothing that the Christians call them deicides. Proudhon, the atheist, buys into this deicide business. The Jew is the enemy of the human race. Marx, of course, I like this one from Marx. The emancipation of the Jews is the emancipation of mankind from Judaism. Scholl Friedlander discusses, redemptive, what he calls redemptive anti-Semitism. I think there's an element of redemption at work in most manifestations of anti-Semitism. And here it says, in redemptive anti-Semitism, the struggle against the Jews is the dominant aspect of a worldview in which other racist themes are but secondary appendages. Redemption would come as liberation from the Jews, as their expulsion, possibly their annihilation. I don't think Hajj Amin al-Husseini's Jew hatred was about racism. This is about power, the power to be as God. Ruhollah Khomeini said, all the glory that has ever come to Islam has come through the sword. This is in his work, Islamic Government. Through the sword. Power determines reality. It's not that a certain reality might determine a need to have power. No, it's the power determines the reality itself. I mentioned the Nazi mission to render the world Juden rein, purified, and for the sake of a paradise on earth, in heaven. Well, and Hitler was complicit with the church's agenda, yeah, in some ways, right? That had been there for centuries. Hitler, the Nazis don't come out of nowhere. There's a lot of preparation of the ground for them, both religiously and ideologically. The Holocaust can't be explained. I'm not sure it can be explained. But to invoke the Treaty of Versailles or economic hardship or that as the cause of the Holocaust, maybe it's in the mix, but it doesn't explain why all of Europe was involved in the slaughter of the Jews, all of Christendom. Sometimes I've been asked, how could it happen? How could the Holocaust happen in the heart of Christendom in an enlightened Europe? And smart ass that I can be, sometimes I'll say, well, it's because the Jews were trapped in the heart of Christendom in an enlightened Europe. You know, at the Eichmann trial, Eichmann commented at least once, maybe twice, on the first time he saw geysers of blood shooting up from the ground. Mass graves. Yeah, the Hungarian case is very, in a way, they all have their own unique features, but more Jews were murdered in Auschwitz in 2 months, in May, June, into July of 44 than in the previous 2 years. So, I mean, it's lightning speed. Yeah.
And the war is lost.
The
war is already, in other words, and they're doing it knowing the war is lost.
But they didn't want to lose the war against the Jews.
Jews, exactly.
Hezbollah, as you've seen Hassan Nasrallah already, who says that Hezbollah is the clearinghouse for all humanity. You want to go to heaven, you got to go through Hezbollah. So I hope, some of this may shed a little light on how we might read this image, the eternal Jew. It's used today, for example, when you determine that all Jews are white. In other words, when whiteness becomes a synonym for what's threatening or oppressive or even evil, and you put the Jews in that category, that's a manifestation of eternal Jew. Because when you look at Jews, you don't necessarily see white people. You see people of all descriptions. But they're all white in some quarters of things like critical race theory. I think that's a manifestation of what's at work in this notion of the eternal Jew. If you're Jewish, you have your own responsibility. You have a Jewish responsibility. Sometimes when I'm asked, what should we as Jews do in response? And my short answer is, be Jews. Follow your Judaism. Don't apologize for it. Follow it with joy and thanksgiving. Openly. And don't stand idly by your brother's blood. Now, the latter can apply to any human. The Jew is a brother or sister to any human who is summoned. Don't stand idly by your brother's blood. So I think Jews and non-Jews are summoned, in my view, from on high, to say something, to do something, and not be silent in the face of demonization, delegitimization, lies, murder of Jews, because Charles sometimes quotes Elie Wiesel, what begins with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews, because the question is not a Jewish question, it's a human question. It's a question about what constitutes the holiness of a human being. The Jews are summoned, chosen, to say to the world as a light unto the nations, every human being is chosen is entrusted with the care of someone who's infinitely precious, infinitely dear. Jew or non-Jew. Every soul enters this realm on a mission. And every soul is indispensable to all of creation. So the response, and anywhere you see anti-Semitism, racism, hatred, I don't know if I mentioned, but I don't think anti-Semitism is a form of racism. For the reasons I just now said, I think racism is a form of anti-Semitism. You have to oppose this Judaic teaching about holiness of a human being in order to arrive at a racist outlook. So the obligation devolves upon any child of Adam, any Ben Adam, any human being, Jewish and non-Jewish. But if you're Jewish, as I said, be Jewish. Be Jewish. Thank you.